Hello, I made a breakfast soup this morning, but it didn't turn out as well as I'd hoped. It's rather thin and lacking in flavor. Could we try making it a bit thicker next time? However, we should be mindful of the salt content since my doctor has advised me to limit my intake. But honestly, I do enjoy bold tastes. Speaking of preferences, my mother-in-law, Brittany, is quite particular about her food. She likes it heavily seasoned, even though her health isn't the best. She's a bit overweight and on the verge of diabetes. Her doctor has warned her about her diet, but she doesn't seem concerned and often adds extra seasoning to the dishes I prepare. It's surprising how much salt and pepper she sprinkles on, regardless of the health-conscious spices I use. It never seems to satisfy her, and I'm genuinely worried about her health if she continues this way. It's challenging dealing with Brittany. She tends to be critical and difficult. My name is Diana. I'm 31 years old, and besides working, I manage our home. I've been married for 4 years, and we don't have children. The issue is that I'm unable to have children, and Brittany never lets me forget it. She often tells me that as a woman, my inability to bear children makes me less valuable, and that I should be grateful just for being allowed in the house. We've tried many times, and I've been through numerous treatments, but nothing has worked. It's both physically and emotionally draining, so I've decided to stop the treatments. They're costly, and continuing without any guarantee of success is difficult. My husband once mentioned that investing in fertility treatments felt pointless. This whole situation weighs heavily on me, especially when my husband echoes his mother's harsh words, agreeing that my inability to conceive somehow makes me less complete. Despite everything, I've always wanted a baby, but now I think it might be time to accept and find peace with our circumstances. Despite my husband urging me to conceive quickly, the pressure only added to my stress. I couldn't just get pregnant because it was expected of me, and after ceasing the fertility treatments, I contemplated finding joy just with my husband. However, my mother-in-law kept her hopes for a grandchild alive, often nudging me about it. She even went as far as buying diapers and flaunting them in front of me, proclaiming, "Look, I got diapers. You'll need them one day." In response, I quipped, "Aren't those a bit small for you, Brittany?" To which she replied excitedly, "These are for a baby, can't you see?" I retorted sarcastically, "Well, I wouldn't know. I'm the broken woman who can't have kids." That comment upset her, and she stormed off to her room. I was relieved when she left, already exhausted from work and not in the mood to handle her harsh remarks. It seems her favorite pastime is making my life difficult. We moved in with my in-laws after my father-in-law passed away a year ago. It was a hard time for her, and around then, her doctor had also warned her about her risk of diabetes. We moved in to support her, but despite her condition, she's okay as long as she adheres to her medications and maintains a proper diet. Yet, she often neglects her meds and eats whatever she likes, risking her health further. Honestly, I dread the thought of being responsible for her care. I'm still in my 20s, working full-time, and it's already a lot handling everything. The following day, which was my day off, I was busy with household chores. Usually, my mother-in-law spends her time lounging on the sofa with snacks, but unexpectedly, she got up and wandered into my room. I didn't want her in there. My hands were full, so I didn't object when my mother-in-law said she had cleaned my room. "Thanks," I replied, though I felt a twinge of suspicion. "You know, if you leave your room messy, you'll attract bugs," she joked. I managed a smile and said, "Sure, enjoy your clean room," still unsure about her true intentions. It seemed she took my response as gratitude, which only made her actions seem more dubious. I couldn't shake the feeling she was scheming something. That evening, I decided to sleep in my husband's room. He had been away on business since the previous day and wouldn't be back soon. Even if he found out, I knew he wouldn't mind. We usually slept in separate rooms because of my nursing job, which has regular hours and occasional night shifts. Our relationship had also grown a bit distant, but mainly, I didn't want to disturb him with my coming and going at odd hours. After ensuring my mother-in-law had retired to her room, I slipped into my husband's room, thinking, she's in her room, now I can finally get some rest. I ended up spending 3 nights there. My mother-in-law, however, started to grow suspicious of my upbeat demeanor. She began asking odd questions. "Are you sure you're not feeling any discomfort or anything?" she inquired one day. I dodged her gaze and responded, "What do you mean?" She dropped the subject abruptly, but it was clear she was pondering something. Later that day, as she ate her meal alone, I prepared to relax at home before my night shift. Relaxing, however, isn't much of an option with my mother-in-law around. She seldom assists with any household chores and prefers to direct me on what to do, making it hard to truly unwind. While my mother-in-law lounged on the couch, munching on snacks and absorbed in her manga aimed at women, I couldn't help but suspect she was plotting her next move to rile me up. I glanced at the comic's cover. It was titled, "Epic Mother and Daughter-in-Law Swamp Battle." I rolled my eyes at her dramatic choice of reading material. My husband finally returned from his business trip, arriving home late at around 9 p.m., looking utterly exhausted. "I'm going to take a bath," he declared. "Sure, I'll heat it for you. Have a beer while you wait," I suggested. He was about to agree, but then I added, "Actually, it's not safe to drink alcohol before a bath." He sighed and opted for a non-alcoholic beer instead, following my caution about the risks of mixing alcohol with hot water. I thought it was common sense, especially since even saunas have signs warning against entering while intoxicated, but it seems common sense isn't so common in my household. After his bath, my husband started singing loudly. We live in a single-family home, but with it being late, I worried about the neighbors. "Hey, you're too loud," I called out. "Shut it. You're the one being loud," he shot back. I quietly urged him to stop, but then my mother-in-law intervened, walking into the bathroom area to defend him. "What's wrong with that?" she challenged. "You don't know how to treat your husband, do you? Always so inconsiderate and complaining," she scolded me. "I'm not the one always complaining, Brittany," I retorted. "You're definitely not cute. Not that you're a beauty to begin with," she sneered back. I shrugged it off, replying, "That's okay with me. I probably look like a knockout beauty in some other country. No worries." Afterward, my husband finished his bath and started drinking. It was already 9:40 p.m., and I needed to head out for my shift at the hospital. Even though it was close by, there was a lot to prepare for a busy night ahead. As I prepared to leave for work a bit early, I mentioned to my husband, "By the way, I've been sleeping in your room. Would you mind using mine tonight? My clothes are scattered everywhere." He casually responded, "Sure, it doesn't matter to me." "Okay, I'm heading out then. Take care," I whispered to him, trying to keep my voice low so Brittany wouldn't overhear. Just as I reached for my bag to leave, I heard my husband let out a loud groan. I turned around to see him curled up on the floor, clutching his leg and groaning in pain. His face contorted with agony, and Brittany's face went pale as she started to panic. "What's happening? Speak!" she demanded, but he was too pained to respond. I felt a rush of adrenaline, knowing I needed to act fast, but then I noticed something odd. The floor was unusually slippery. Even in my socks, I felt like I could easily slip. "What on earth is this?" I exclaimed, looking at both my husband and Brittany. "Brittany, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything. It's not my fault," Brittany protested quickly. Realizing that blaming anyone at that moment wouldn't help, I immediately called for an ambulance. My husband was taken straight to the hospital where I work, and suddenly, work became the last thing on my mind. At the hospital, he continued to clutch his leg, sweating and writhing in pain. "It hurts so bad. Hang in there, please," I pleaded, watching him suffer. Thankfully, a doctor quickly examined him and managed to relieve some of our fears. His leg was indeed broken, a 5th metatarsal fracture, just as we suspected after he slipped on that slick floor. His foot was visibly swollen, a typical symptom of this kind of fracture, usually caused by tripping or putting too much weight on the foot. Speaking from personal experience, I recalled my similar injury. Years ago, I had twisted my ankle falling down the stairs. I was lost in my music, not paying attention, and heard a loud snap followed by intense pain. I, too, was diagnosed with a 5th metatarsal fracture. It was quite an embarrassing memory, but it came flooding back as I saw my husband in a similar kind of distress. I ended up lying to my close friends about my husband's injury because he didn't need to stay at the hospital after his fracture was confirmed. He could come home. On that day, I was scheduled for a night shift, but my nursing supervisor insisted I take the night off. The injury wasn't life-threatening, but she seemed genuinely concerned for us. Later, while resting, my husband remarked, "I survived, but now I've got a fever." I replied, "Well, you did break your leg, so a fever isn't too surprising, but I'm wondering why the floor was so slippery. Maybe we should ask Brittany about that." Curious and a bit wary, I approached Brittany. "Hey, what did you do to the floor in the room?" Her response startled me. "Well, the floor was slippery because I slipped and fell. I could have seriously hurt myself," my husband interjected. Brittany then shockingly admitted, "That room is meant for my daughter-in-law, so I greased the floor. I was hoping she would slip, so I put a lot of grease on the floor. I never expected you to go in there and slip." I was flabbergasted. "Unbelievable!" I exclaimed. It turns out my mother-in-law had intentionally greased the floor, hoping I would fall. Although she claimed to have cleaned the room, her actual intention was to harm me. I was furious. If I had entered that room, I could have been seriously injured. Breaking a leg would be the least of my worries. Hitting my head could have been fatal. My mother-in-law's actions were practically criminal. "You're despicable. You're not even family to me anymore. I got seriously hurt because of you. I'm going to the police," I declared. In a desperate attempt to deflect blame, Brittany retorted, "Wait a minute, I didn't directly cause any harm, did I? Your wife is the one to blame. She told you to enter her room, didn't she? So this is all her fault." "Shut up, that's not the point. You're getting arrested," my husband said as he furiously dialed the police. In a frantic attempt to prevent him from calling, my mother-in-law tried to snatch the phone away. Despite the chaos unfolding around him and a broken leg, my husband clung to his phone, speaking urgently with the police. I found myself wishing I were anywhere but here, perhaps at work or even in a hospital, instead of entangled in this distressing situation. I knew it wouldn't be long before our neighbors heard about the ordeal, particularly since I was nearly injured as well. I considered involving the police myself. It was uncertain, but she might face charges of attempted assault. Yet, as I voiced this idea, Brittany protested, "Wait, now I don't want to involve the police." "Really? You knew what could happen when you chose this path. Did you think you could erase me from existence?" I retorted sharply. "I did hope it would be simpler if he just vanished," Brittany admitted, shockingly indifferent. "Wow, that's appalling. You're downright criminal in your thinking. Personally, I wish they'd lock you away forever," sneered N. "That's it. Let's get a divorce," I declared resolutely. "What? I can't continue living this way. If I stay, it might put my life at risk someday. Your moral compass is so skewed, I can't bear it any longer," I explained. "Wait, please, let's not end our marriage over this," my husband implored. "After you've demeaned and insulted me, do you even understand how much that hurt?" I replied. "I don't need you. I'm quite capable on my own," I asserted confidently. "No, I need you. I was counting on your income. I even went ahead and signed a contract for the Honda Century I've always wanted from Japan," my husband protested. "I don't care about that anymore," I said with resolve. I cleaned the grimy floor and quickly gathered my belongings. Stuffing essentials into my carry-on, I removed my wedding ring, set it on the table, and began searching through a shelf full of dishes for the divorce papers. "Ah, found them. The divorce papers you wrote up before. Remember? You said if I couldn't have a child within 3 years, we'd divorce." "Well, thanks. I can't have children now," I concluded, sealing my decision as I prepared to leave the turmoil behind. Holding the divorce papers firmly in my hand, I declared, "So, let's divorce." I added, feeling a mix of relief and resolve. "You must feel relieved now." "What about the loan for my Century?" my husband asked, referring to his cherished car. "Who cares?" I replied dismissively. I left the house and headed straight to the hospital. The compassionate charge nurse didn't need to ask many questions. She seemed to understand that I had my reasons. Being a nurse, I knew I could support myself without relying on a husband. I wondered why I had tolerated poor treatment and mean comments from my in-laws for so long. The entire situation seemed absurd, so I decided to focus solely on my job and put the past behind me. The next morning, I officially filed for divorce and he became my ex-husband. Given the emotional turmoil he caused, I consulted a lawyer about seeking compensation. In the end, my ex-husband was ordered to pay me, and I couldn't help but think, serves you right. Since the police got involved, the neighbors started avoiding my mother-in-law. She had openly discussed why my ex-husband had broken his bone, casting her in a negative light. Everyone now saw her as a terrible parent. Eventually, my ex-husband distanced himself from her and seemingly kicked her out. Though there was a survivor's benefit program, it didn't pay much. She lamented that living alone was impossible. Given her love for food, our previous grocery bills had been exorbitant, so adjusting to a modest lifestyle on just the survivor's benefit was challenging for her. As for my ex-husband, I lost interest in whatever happened to him. He had mentioned taking out a car loan, but I assumed he wouldn't be able to afford it on his salary. He had taken me for granted, expecting me to contribute financially, which had been a significant annoyance. Despite not being particularly affluent, he was the type to make impulsive purchases like a new car. Later, I started dating a doctor from the hospital. 3 years after that, we got married and were blessed with a child, which felt like a miracle after everything I had been through. From now on, I'm committed to doing my best for my family, cherishing each moment and the new beginnings we've created together.
Why are you without children, insisting on living in such a big house? Just move out. My sister-in-law's sharp words cut through the air like a knife, dripping with entitlement. We hadn't spoken since our last tense conversation about the property, and now this. A bold, unsolicited demand out of nowhere. As her words sank in, I felt a surge of emotions, apprehension, disbelief, and a simmering sense of injustice. I had no idea at the time that this confrontation was just the beginning of something far more significant, something that would change everything. My name is Serenity. I've been married for 10 years, and am now in my early 40s. We don't have any children, but my life with my beloved husband, Rory, is very peaceful and blissful. Rory is a typical company employee, living without any major changes, and he is 5 years older than me. Since I work part-time, our two-person household has a reasonable amount of financial leeway, allowing us some luxuries. Our married life has been smooth without any major ups and downs. However, a minor incident started causing ripples in our tranquil daily life. This incident involved the news of my beloved father's death and inheriting his apartment. When we got married, my father began living alone in a new, modern two-bedroom apartment he had purchased. On the other hand, Rory and I lived in my childhood home, a 4-bedroom apartment filled with memories. This childhood home was transferred to me by my father when I got married. Before that, my father, mother, and I used to live there. When I got married, my father gave it to me with his blessings for our happiness. He suggested, "Why not start your new life in this home?" I was elated by his offer. Later, when my father passed away, I inherited the new 2-bedroom apartment he had been living in. I was very fond of that apartment, so I decided to rent it out immediately. However, one day during a conversation with my in-laws, an unexpected suggestion came up. My mother-in-law said, "Amy and her children are living in a small place. How about they move to Serenity's 4-bedroom apartment?" Amy is Rory's younger sister, who is divorced and raising 3 kids. They were living in a 2-bedroom apartment, which might be a bit tight for them. But, to be honest, my relationship with Amy has not been great. Every time we met, she would make slightly sarcastic remarks about us not having children yet. Rory and I decided to get married just before I turning 30. Since then, Amy started making pointed remarks. After I crossed 30, her comments became even more hurtful. Remarks like, "You're already past 30 and still have no kids," or, "Aren't you seen as less of a woman without children?" were thrown in jest. What shocked me the most was an incident after my beloved father passed away. Amy said, "It's a pity you couldn't show your father the face of his grandchild." It left me cold. Amy is actually 3 years older than me. Instead of being a younger sister-in-law, she's more like an older one. I've always tried to treat her as family and interacted with her amicably, but after such remarks, I naturally built a wall in my heart against her. As an only child, my father was my only family. Amid the grief of losing him, Amy's words were truly shocking. Time had passed since my father's death, and I hadn't seen Amy for a while. But out of the blue, my mother-in-law made a surprising proposal. Amy says she'll pay $500 in rent each month. Looking at my mother-in-law's smug face, I was so shocked that I couldn't say anything. The apartment we lived in was a bit old, but we had taken good care of it, so it was still in excellent condition. There was a big shopping mall nearby, and trains and buses were easily accessible. If we were to rent out this apartment, I thought it wouldn't go for less than $2,000 a month. But $500? I was truly surprised. Did they even understand the going rate for this area? It's unthinkable for this spacious 4-bedroom apartment's rent to be just $500. Maybe they assumed I had agreed, because I didn't say anything. My mother-in-law seemed very enthusiastic about the idea. "You guys already have another apartment, right? You can just live there. Even if you don't renew the lease later on, Amy and the others will move in, so it's fine," she concluded. Rory was also excited, saying, "That's really a great idea. The place where your father lived is new and lovely, and it's perfect for just the two of us." At this rate, I felt like the conversation was progressing without considering my opinions, and I started to panic. I couldn't help but blurt out, "Isn't there an option for all of you to live together in this apartment?" My in-laws' house was big, and they were the only ones living there. Rooms for Rory and Amy were also available, so I thought it would be no problem if they moved in. After all, they'd said they wanted to live in a bigger place. Normally, before making such moves, you would consult your family, I think. However, moving to the in-laws' house would mean the kids changing schools, and they seemed concerned about the hassle and cost of buying new school uniforms and gym clothes. I was hesitant to clearly express my reluctance to rent to Amy in front of my mother-in-law, but I told her, "This place is my family home. I can't just leave easily." I left their house that day, but my mother-in-law said, "You don't have to decide right away," which made me feel she hadn't given up. When I returned home, I asked Rory, "This apartment is precious to us. Why are you deciding so easily to leave?" He looked surprised and responded, "Well, it's not a single-family home." I was a bit shocked by his reply, perhaps because he grew up in a single-family home. An apartment doesn't feel like a real home to him, but I wished he could at least apologize for not understanding my feelings. Upset, I raised my voice. "It's my home, my apartment. Why are you deciding things without consulting me?" Rory looked upset. "We've been married for 10 years. Why do you say my apartment? It's our apartment," he replied, his voice containing a hint of anger. I wished he could understand how I feel about this apartment, as my cherished home. If he had hesitated to rent the apartment to his sister, I might not have felt hurt by his words. At that moment, I felt hurt. We tried to calmly discuss it many times after that, but it wasn't easy. Rory seemed not to understand my feelings at all, and I got words like money-minded, stubborn, and selfish thrown at me. As time passed and the seasons changed, the wall between us remained unchanged. During that time, I kept receiving messages from my mother-in-law asking if the discussions about living together were progressing. The pressure from my mother-in-law and Rory, who wouldn't understand my perspective, slowly wore me down. I felt I was reaching my breaking point. One day, I was shocked to receive an email from Amy. It read, "Why are you two, without kids, insisting on staying in such a big place? You don't need that much space. Just move out." I hadn't heard from Amy since our discussions about the apartment, and yet here she was, out of the blue, telling me to leave. I never imagined I'd receive such a direct email. Reading that message, I reflected on how much I had endured and felt angry and resentful. The idea of divorce crossed my mind several times. Each time I tried to calm myself, but I felt like I was at my limit. I decided to go to the local government office to initiate divorce proceedings. I also decided to reach out to a specific place for the next steps. A few days later, with a renewed mindset, I visited the court. Upon checking, it turned out that both the apartment I lived in and the one I was renting out were all under my name. It was my apartment. Confirming this fact, I decided to confront my relationship with Rory and thought about what I should do next. I wanted to thoroughly discuss everything with him. I've told you many times this is my house. I just can't stand the idea of renting this apartment to Amy. I don't want to rent my home to someone who belittles and looks down on me. Please persuade your mother and Amy, I asked. Rory's face darkened, looking like he was tired of this topic again. I had told Rory about all the harassment I received from Amy and how much I disliked her. I wanted him to understand my feelings, but the outcome was different. Rory sided with Amy, saying, "Amy is right. In hindsight, I could have gotten a divorce at that point, saving myself from this anguish, but I couldn't end a relationship that had lasted for 10 years so easily. Deep down, I felt that way. Maybe you're just being overly sensitive about Amy. Perhaps you feel like she's looking down on you, but maybe you're exaggerating things. I really don't understand why you feel this way," Rory said, making light of my feelings without knowing the whole story. His words stung. Was I the only one feeling like this? "If that's the case, will you sign this?" I asked, and presented him with the divorce papers. A look of shock appeared in Rory's eyes, but he immediately said, "Do you really feel that way? You want to end our relationship over such a trivial matter?" "I'm serious. I care about Amy too, and I always wanted to be with you, but recently our relationship feels different. I don't feel the love anymore, so I'm leaving," I concluded, looking into his eyes. My heart ached at Rory's attitude. His casual smile hinted that he didn't grasp the gravity of my feelings, and I felt a tear threatening to spill. I wished he would leave sooner rather than later. "Maybe Amy and my mother don't necessarily want to get along with you. Have you ever considered that because you always think about yourself? That's why our relationship is like this," Rory added in a slightly softer tone. "This is how we always ended up misunderstanding each other, even though we tried to care for one another. Look, I think it might be impossible to fix our relationship. No matter how much we talk, I feel there's still a distance between our hearts. I can't even imagine a future with you anymore. If you won't respond to my feelings, then we'll have to take legal action," I explained calmly. Rory, with a mix of surprise and sadness on his face, quivered. "Do you really feel that way?" he exclaimed. Afterwards, he left the house without a word. He probably didn't want to talk anymore and just wanted to escape the situation. He hadn't signed the divorce papers and left his belongings behind. A few days later, Rory returned. His eyes looked sad and somewhat wary. "What should we do from here?" he gently asked. He might think I'd forgive him if he humbled himself, but everything was already settled. "There's nothing left to discuss. If you agree to the divorce, sign these documents. If you can't, then we'll have to seek legal action. Also, I'm letting go of this house," I said. Actually, I had been considering selling the house for some time. The day I went to get the documents, I consulted with Mr. Martin, an old friend of my father's. I've known him since I was a child. He was by my father's side until his last day. Mr. Martin, who attended my father's funeral, gave me his business card and asked to be contacted if any problems arose. The card listed his law firm's details, and through Mr. Martin's introduction, I was fortunate to get assistance from a judicial scrivener regarding the inheritance my father left behind. When I told Mr. Martin about my situation, he gave sincere advice. He informed me about the importance of verifying ownership, handling complications in divorce negotiations, and other helpful tips. Thanks to his advice, I could protect myself. After Rory temporarily left the house, I decided to sell the apartment. I quickly reached out to real estate agents and informed them of my intentions to sell. I also updated Mr. Martin about the deteriorating relationship with Rory, his refusal to sign the divorce papers, and sought his support for the divorce procedures. When Rory found out about the sale of the apartment, he reacted with both shock and anger. "You always said this was our family home. Are you really planning to let go of such an important place? And after being so concerned about Amy, you're truly selfish." But his words no longer unsettled me. "Do you have anything else to say?" I asked, looking him straight in the eyes and taking a deep breath. He was momentarily taken aback but quickly began to assert his views. Why would you decide such an important matter on your own? The apartment might be in your name, but after a divorce, there should be a division of property. This apartment is the property of both of us who live here, right? Rory became emotional and pleaded with desperation. In response, I gave him a slight smile and replied, "Actually, this apartment has been under my name even before we got married. I've already checked with my lawyer, and any property acquired before marriage is not subject to property division." Selling the apartment, of course, met resistance, but I didn't want to leave behind more painful memories in this place. Armed with information about property division from Mr. Martin, I decisively chose to sell. Rory, upon learning the truth, suddenly changed his attitude. "I'm sorry, this place is special to you, but it hasn't been sold yet, right? Please reconsider. Why don't we give it another shot together? I'll explain things to Amy and Mom. Please just stop the divorce and the apartment sale," he pleaded. Hearing his words, I questioned myself why I had stayed with him for 10 long years. I'm dumbfounded that I chose someone like him. Don't put on a nice face now. When we were together, you never once took my side, did you? Thinking of starting over with you now is unfathomable. So please leave. We both need a fresh start, I said firmly. He wasn't easily convinced, creating a vast rift between us. But after navigating through various procedures, I finally managed to end our relationship. It's the beginning of a new life. The idea of being alone was initially daunting, but I realized it isn't as scary as it seemed. Now I live in a new 2-bedroom apartment, living life on my terms.